Hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the topic mechanoreceptors and their stimulation. So these are the topics that we'll be discussing right now. As you have already realized, many of the topics are not mentioned in the syllabus, but it is very important for us to know about these concepts right now so that we can understand the upcoming chapters easily. So we'll be discussing all these topics in brief account right now. So coming on to our topic. So what are sensory receptors? Sensory receptors are specialized structures that respond to changes in the environment. Now activation of these receptors results in graded potential that trigger the nerve impulses. Now, brain is the center where the awareness of the stimulus or sensation and interpretation of the stimulus, that is perception, occurs. Now, the receptors can be classified based on the type of stimulus to which they respond, body location, the structural complexity, and adaptation. So, we'll be studying about all the receptor types based on the classifications. So first one is the classification by stimulus type. So these are the 5 different types of receptors based on stimulus type. Mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, photoreceptors, chemoreceptors, and nociceptors. Mechanoreceptors are our topic of discussion, or our topic is confined to mechanoreceptors, but these receptors also we will discuss in brief account right now because the next chapters deal with these kinds of receptors. So, what are mechanoreceptors? These are the receptors that respond to touch, pressure, vibrations, and stretch. Thermoreceptors are sensitive to changes in the temperature. Photoreceptors respond to light energy. Chemoreceptors respond to chemicals. Olfactory receptors are examples. And nociceptors are sensitive to pain-causing stimuli. So next one is the classification of receptors by location. So there are 3 types of receptors based on their location in the body: exteroceptors, interoceptors, and proprioceptors. Exteroceptors, as the name indicates, they are located at the outermost surface of the body, or they respond to stimuli arising outside the body. For example, the receptors in the skin for touch, pressure, pain, and temperature are examples of exteroceptors. And interoceptors, as the name indicates, they respond to the stimuli arising in the internal viscera or the internal parts of the body, for example blood vessels, and these are sensitive to chemical changes, tissue stretch, and temperature changes. And proprioceptors, these respond to stretch in the skeletal muscles, tendons, joints, ligaments, and connective tissue coverings of bones and muscles. This receptor actually determines or recognizes the body positions and movements. That is, it informs brain of the body movement and position. The next one is the classification of receptors by structural complexity. So there are 2 types of receptors: complex receptors and simple receptors. Complex receptors are the specialized sense organs for vision, hearing, olfaction, gustatory, and equilibrium. And simple receptors of the general senses include the tactile receptors, then the temperature sensing receptors, pain sensing receptors, that is nociceptors, etc. So they have unencapsulated, that is a free or encapsulated nerve endings. Now classification of receptors by adaptation. So what is meant by adaptation? Adaptation is the decline of the electric response of a receptor neuron over time in spite of the continued presence of an appropriate stimulus of constant strength. So there is a gradual decrease in its response to a stimulus. Even when the stimulus is present for a very long period of time, there will be a decrease in its response to that stimulus. That is called as adaptation. And there are slowly adapting receptors, intermediate adapting receptors, and rapidly adapting receptors. Slowly adapting receptors include Merkel and Ruffini corpuscles, then some free endings. Now, rapidly adapting receptors include Meissner's corpuscles, PACINIAN corpuscles, and some free hair endings, etc. So all these examples of receptors, okay, we will be discussing about each and every one of them in brief account at the end of this presentation. So it is very important for us to know that these receptors exist in our body, even if it is not mentioned in the syllabus. Now, what is differential sensitivity? Each type of receptor is highly sensitive to one type of stimulus for which it is designed, and yet is almost non-responsive to other types of sensory stimuli. It is true, right? One type of receptor is responding to only one kind of or a particular kind of stimulus. For example, if we take mechanoreceptors, mechanoreceptors normally respond to stimulus like touch, vibration, pressure changes, or something like that. Okay, so it won't be responding to a chemical change or a chemical concentration change in the body. Actually, what kind of receptor responds to the change in the chemical concentration or change in chemicals? That is chemoreceptors. So, there is a distinct or there is a special or specific stimuli to which a particular kind of receptor responds. So, that is what is called as differential sensitivity. So, there is differential sensitivity for each and every kind of receptor in the body. So let's come to our topic of discussion, that is the mechanoreceptors. What are mechanoreceptors? As we have already discussed, mechanoreceptors are the receptors that respond to touch, vibrations, or pressure changes, etc. And there are three classes of mechanoreceptors: tactile receptors, proprioceptors, and baroreceptors. So tactile receptor, as its name indicates, it responds to touch. It is an end organ like Meissner's corpuscle or PACINIAN corpuscle, which we will discuss at the end of the presentation, and it responds to light touch. Baroreceptors, it responds to changes in the pressure like blood pressure or any other kind of pressure changes in the body. Now proprioceptors, it is found in muscles, tendons, joints, etc. It detects the position and motion of the body and gives signal to the brain or informs the brain regarding the position of the body. These are the examples of mechanoreceptors. It is just given for the educational purposes, just to know that these kind of mechanoreceptors exist. You have to just go through these kinds of receptors. So coming on to the transduction of sensory stimuli into nerve impulses. So whatever be the type of stimulus that excites the receptor, its immediate effect or the important effect is to change the membrane electrical potential of the receptor. And this change in potential is called as receptor potential. And the basic cause of the change in membrane potential is the change in the permeability of the membrane of the receptor. So this allows the ions to diffuse more readily through the membrane, and this causes a change in the transmembrane potential. So this is the first or immediate effect of a stimulus on the membrane of a receptor. So mechanisms of receptor potential. So how can receptor potentials be created, or what are the methods by which receptor potential is induced in the membrane of the receptors? So it can be by mechanical deformation of the receptors, or by application of chemical to the membrane, by changing the temperature of the membrane of the receptor, or by the effects of electromagnetic radiation. Maximum receptor potential amplitude. The maximum amplitude of most sensory receptor potentials is about 100 millivolts, but this level occurs only at an extremely high intensity of sensory stimulus. This is about the same maximum voltage recorded in action potentials and is also the change in voltage when the membrane becomes maximally permeable to sodium ions. So this is a graph showing the maximum receptor potential amplitude. Now receptor potential to action potential. How is receptor potential capable of eliciting an action potential? So there is a particular threshold level for the receptor potential. So when the receptor potential rises above that threshold level, it elicits action potential in the nerve fibers attached to the receptor. So more the receptor potential rises above the threshold level, greater will be the action potential frequency. So this is given in the graph given here. So here is an example of how receptor potential is being created and how receptor potential is capable of eliciting action potential. So here is an example of PACINIAN corpuscle about which we will be studying at the end of the presentation. So here as you can see, this is a cross-section kind of a diagrammatic representation of PACINIAN corpuscle. Okay. So PACINIAN corpuscle, you can see here, there is a small area of the terminal fiber that has been deformed by compression of the corpuscle. So there is a deformed area here, and the ion channels have been opened in the membrane, allowing the positively charged sodium ions to diffuse to the interior of the fiber. So here the ion channels have been opened and sodium ions diffuse to the inside of the fiber. Now this action creates an increased positivity inside the fiber. So there is an increased positivity inside the fiber, and this is called the receptor potential. This is the receptor potential. Now the receptor potential in turn induces a local current. Okay, local circuit of current flow. There is a local circuit of current flow, and it is shown by here red arrows, right? You can see the local circuit of current flow. And at the first node of Ranvier, you can see the first node of Ranvier, which is located inside the capsule of the PACINIAN corpuscle. The local current flow depolarizes the fiber membrane. It depolarizes the fiber membrane. Here actually the sodium ions diffused inside. There was created a negative charge outside, a positive charge inside. Again at the node of Ranvier, it starts to depolarize, and it sets off typical action potential, and that is transmitted along the nerve fiber from the base of this PACINIAN corpuscle towards the central nervous system. So that is how receptor potential is being generated, and receptor potential elicits action potential, and this is shown with an example of PACINIAN corpuscle here.